Good evening, and welcome to Caltech, and welcome to our Behind the Book event for the fall quarter. So we're very happy that you're here for this event tonight, and we're very, very proud to be presenting Jim Fruchterman, who graduated from Caltech in the 80s and has got a really interesting bio, which we're going to get to in a bit. I'm Michael Alexander. My title is Arts and Culture Liaison here on the campus, and I work on the Movies That Matter series, on the Behind the Book series, and we get to bring a few performing arts events here as well. Before I get too far into this, I do want to ask everybody to put their phones onto the silent mode, turn it off, airplane mode works, and just note where the exits are in case there is an emergency. I want to also let you know, this is a series that we do where we're either inviting Caltech professors who have written books that we think are of interest to the general public, or we invite authors that they know about that belong on our stage in conversation with a Caltech professor, and that's the basis of the Behind the Book series. I want to thank our sponsors that help make these programs possible. The Caltech Employees Federal Credit Union. Tonight, particularly, we have the Lind Center for Science, Society, and Public Policy that has played a very major role in helping us get this event together. And also we have the Caltech Management Association, which has been helping us spread the word about this among the Caltech community. You could sign up to get on our mailing list if you're not already, and all you have to do is go to events.caltech.edu, and there is an easy way to find the sign-up page, and we send out one emailing a month. We're not going to pester you regularly. We're just going to pester you once a month and send you the calendar of events that we have coming up on the campus. Want to also remind you, I think many of you probably saw it as you came in, that we have a bookseller outside so you can buy tonight's featured book, and our author, Jim Fruchterman, will be there to sign books at the end of the evening. Want to also remind you about some upcoming events. This is the busiest 2 weeks for public events of this quarter. Tomorrow night is a Watson lecture over in the Beckman Auditorium, and Nick Hutzler is going to be talking about molecules, mysteries, and the matter of existence. So if you're not signed up for that already, it makes sense to go to that event site and register for it. We usually have empty seats and are able to let everybody in, but sometimes these things do fill up, so it's best to get on that list. On Monday night, again in Beckman Auditorium, we're going to be presenting a film called Bright Harvest, and Caltech's Space Solar Power Project is the feature of this film, Bright Harvest. 3 Caltech professors have been working on how to capture solar energy way out in space and beam it to Earth, and this film is going to focus on that. And then after the film shows, which is about a 30-minute film, we're going to have the 3 professors and the 2 co-producers, film director of the film, on stage for a conversation and a Q&A. And then, on Thursday, Halloween Eve, we're going to have, again on the Beckman stage, Mars Symphony, a project that started at the Boston Museum of Science. People collaborated there with our JPL colleagues and have created a wonderful piece of music that is celebrating Mars. And I was told that there's even a soundtrack that they're going to be playing too at times that includes wind sounds that were recorded on Mars. So and all of these events are free. So we hope that you'll be able to come back to any of those events that we're starting with tomorrow night at the Watsons. Also want to remind you that Caltech is the home of the Coleman Chamber Music Series, and they're here about 7 Sundays throughout the year, afternoon concerts. Those are ticketed, but they do some of the most incredible programming of great chamber music that you can find in the Los Angeles area. Tonight, when the discussion ends, we're going to have the 2 folks talking for about 30, 40 minutes, and then we're going to open it up for questions and conversation with you. There is going to be a code up on the screen. In fact, I think it's right there right now. You can capture it on your iPhones, and you'll be sending questions to Slido, and then we will be able to send those questions up to the speakers to address. So please capture it now. We'll put it up also during the Q&A itself, so you can, if you don't want to take the time right this minute, you can do it later when a question comes to mind. It's been a pleasure of mine to work on a number of different projects with Professor Michael Alvarez, one of the co-founders of the Lynn Center, and has been very involved in voting activity and voting research. He's really quite a remarkable gentleman, has been on Larry Mantle's show a number of times to help explain the research about that is done to understand people's voting habits and how they poll and things of that sort. And he contacted me about this book and said this was something that would a good idea for Caltech to include in the Behind the Book series. And so it's with great pleasure that I introduce our Michael Alvarez professor, and he will take on the responsibility of introducing our author special guest, Jim Fruchterman.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks for the introduction. I am really excited this evening to host Jim Fruchterman for this Behind the Book series to talk about this fantastic book. I encourage you all to read it. You can get your copies right outside. Technology for Good. As Michael said in his introduction, I had the opportunity to get to know Jim. We can talk about that moment in a few minutes. But he told me about the book. It came out. I read it. I was on a flight. I couldn't put it down. I enjoyed it. For a Caltech grad, it's incredibly readable, right? And I asked him about this on the way over from dinner, and said, you did not learn how to write like this when you were at Caltech. It's a fantastic book.
Thank you very much.
And we'll talk about it. So Jim's really a celebrated figure in our Caltech community. He won the Distinguished Alumni Award in 2013, which for those of you at Caltech know that's a very important honor here at Caltech. His career was marked by a really deliberate pivot from high-risk commercial tech to high-impact social entrepreneurship, and we're going to talk about that pivot tonight. And I think that Jim's career in this book provides a great foundation for us to talk about the role of values, career paths, and the application of the kind of science and technology training and education that we provide here at Caltech to the really important pressing social problems that exist in the world today. So Jim, welcome back to Caltech.
Glad to be here, Mike. Looking forward to chatting with you guys.
So let's start with why you came to Caltech in the first place. So the Caltech origin story. So why did you choose to come to Caltech?
Well, I think my background's kind of like a lot of Caltech students. I was the nerdliest kid in my school. But in my case, when I got to high school, the head of the math department had the Caltech beaver cheer on the wall. And I'd heard of MIT, but not Caltech. But it's cosine, tangent, hyperbolic sine, 3.14159, e to the x, dy, dx, slide rules, tick, 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 tick. And here I am.
Well, there you go. And what house were you in at Caltech?
I was in what was then called Ruddick House. It's now called Venerable. Just being here was kind of a brain feast, as it were. Yeah.
Great. So as some of you know from our community, the house really defines a student and the kind of person that they are, right?
Well, the thing is that if I'd gone to a liberal arts school, I would have been like in the 1% nerdiest. But at Caltech, I was a better than average social guy, right? So I'm glad I came here.
Yeah. Well, we are too. We are too. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about why you decided to write Technology for Good, and from my perspective, how you want this book to really challenge the norms of Silicon Valley, and I also think Caltech, and for what we do here at Caltech. So in the book, you say that your mission is to serve the 90% of humanity that's typically neglected by for-profit technology companies, which instead are really focusing on the richest 10%. But Caltech and our alums are often at the forefront of really highly profitable, very disruptive ventures. So tell us a little bit about that specific moment right? When you realize that the pursuit of the many billions of dollars that you could have been earning over the last umpteen years was really, in a sense, as you call it, a design constraint, right? That prevents technology and people who are technologists from solving these really important social problems that animate you.
Well, you know, the thing is, I didn't come to Caltech to get rich. I don't think my generation did. We came because we thought science and math and engineering was really cool, and we wanted to solve really important problems. We thought, you know, hey, maybe I can invent the next Xerox machine or something like that. You know, that was kind of the example at the time. And it's a two-part story, right? The first part was here on the campus. Because Caltech, if you're into something, you can take a graduate course like as a junior. And so I took the modern optics course, which was about how to design optical systems. And one of the lectures one day was about how to make an optical pattern recognition system. And given the time, the example was how to make a smart missile, right? Because everyone at Caltech either went to become a professor or they went to work for Hughes, right? And the military industrial complex. And so the professor kind of said, well, you know, you've got a camera in the nose and you have this optical processing system. And if it sees the bridge or the airfield or the tank, it recognizes it, zooms in and blows it up. And I went back to my dorm room in Ruddock and went, I wonder if there's a more socially beneficial application of this cool technology. And I didn't know any blind people, but I thought, hey, maybe instead of recognizing tanks on the battlefield, you could recognize letters and words and read to blind people. And being Caltech, you know, the next morning, I ran over to my professor's office and said, I've got my first good idea I've ever had at Caltech. And I described it, and he said, the National Security Agency already has it. It costs $1 million to build one. It's not gonna help blind people. I'm sorry. And I was like, crushed. So years later, I got to start one of Silicon Valley's early machine learning, AI, as we call it today, companies. And we built a machine that could read anything. And in the very first meeting of the founders, I went, hey, if we built this, we could build a reading machine for the blind. So after we got the product in the market, we built a reading machine for the blind prototype. So, you know, we took a piece of paper, we fed it through the scanner. The magic of this technology was to take the picture and turn it into words, like in a word processor file. And we sent it to a first-generation voice synthesizer. And it read the page aloud, you know. These are the times that train men's souls. But it wasn't quite that natural sounding. And the board said, Jim, you're the VP of marketing, for reasons I cannot explain. You know, how big is the market for reading machines to the blind? And I said, I think it's about $1 million per year. Painful silence ensued. And one of the board members said, and the connection to the $25 million we've invested in this company is exactly what? And that's the problem. That's the constraint, right? I mean, it was the coolest, most socially beneficial application, but if we'd raised $25 million, we had promised to make them a lot of money, and going after $1 million market just didn't work. So that was, and that really bummed me out because, you know, even though I'd been drinking the Silicon Valley Kool-Aid for a little while, I had actually thought that my one good idea from Caltech, from college, was the thing I really wanted to do.
So why don't you think this happens more often?
You have to be really weird to break the mold that everyone is telling you should follow. I mean, in Silicon Valley, as a tech entrepreneur, and I started 7 companies in a 10-year period, and only 5 failed. But, you know, when you have an idea that maybe solves a social problem but doesn't make enough money, people tell you it's a dumb idea. And just because it doesn't make enough money doesn't necessarily mean it's a dumb idea. It's just not a great idea for raising money from venture capitalists. And the funny thing is that once you kind of get away from the Midas gene that's operating in a lot of these people or has been activated, you know, people would like to be working on these kinds of things, but they're told there's no way to do it. And, you know, you can make a living in the nonprofit sector, and your kids can explain to their friends what you do. I like that.
So the book is all about trying to tell other people how to take that path.
Well, it's the first book on how to start a nonprofit tech company as opposed to the thousands of books on how to get rich with tech. And when I talk to the average person in technology, they would they would rather be doing what I'm doing and the people who work at my organizations, and there's a few hundred Tech for Good nonprofits, so we're not alone anymore. But they would rather be doing that than selling more advertising. I mean, but they've got a mortgage to pay. That they're trying to get rich, even though that's a lot harder than it looks. And so I actually find people at every stage in their career who I call it moving from money to meaning, actually make this decision. The more you get paid, the bigger the pay cut to work in the nonprofit sector. But if you're an entry-level person, you're probably making the same. But if you're making $500,000 at a tech company, well, let's just say nonprofits don't pay $500,000 a year. You'll be lucky to get 125 or 150. But we have people who do that because, I don't know, maybe like to spend a little bit more time with their family, or maybe not get divorced, or I mean, working in Silicon Valley is not easy on the people who are there, especially the ones who are trying to start a new company and make it. It's a grinder, and I'm glad I had that in my background. But I told my wife I would do this nonprofit thing for a year, and that was 35 plus years ago. It just is. I enjoyed this so much more than working for the VCs, and I had great VCs, relatively speaking.
So you mentioned venture capital a number of times, and so having access for a startup company to copious amounts of venture capital these days is critical for hiring the very best talent that you can hire. How do you go about in some of the nonprofits like Tech Matters and Benetech to find the best talent if you don't have access to that kind of capital?
Sometimes it just takes us longer, but we don't have to change most people in Silicon Valley. We just have to change the mind of 0.0001% that actually chooses to go work for a nonprofit. And we can usually find great people for that. And sometimes, we'll take a generalist and then we'll go to God's gift to fill in the blank, and they'll help us. Why? Because we're doing the coolest thing with their expertise they could imagine. They can't do it for a living, but if they can see how their technology is going to help kids in Zambia or the human rights movement or climate, right? I mean, we get so much help when we ask, or free technology. I mean, 80% of the time when I ask a tech leader to give me their intellectual property for free for a social good application, they say yes. And people go, those greedy bastards? And I'm like, no. They're really proud of what they've created, and they would love to see it used for these things as long as it doesn't hurt their company. And that's the only promise I make is not going to hurt your company. I'll tell your employees how awesome the product is and how it's helping solve this social problem.
So a lot of times when I talk to students and they're kind of facing this, I guess it's almost like a dilemma, and maybe it's a false choice, right? So to what extent is it a path forward today? Is it a choice of values for a really bright Caltech student, an engineer or scientist, or is there really a really viable, productive career path forward for them in this area of Tech for Good?
I think it's got something to do with norms. I mean, values are not just innate, right? We exist in an environment. I mean, when I was at Caltech, I was not told that I should become a tech entrepreneur. The moment I got to Stanford as a grad student, I was out within 3 months in a startup, right? It was like that because that was the norm. And this norm change has happened in other fields. If you look at law, clerking for a justice, working in public interest law, doing pro bono work, that's a social norm in the legal profession. People just, and some people dodge it, but most people think it's just something that's part of the profession, and you get cred for having clerked for a top justice or something like that. That happens less in technology, and I'm hoping that we get back to that. And I don't want to convince people that they should spend their entire career in the nonprofit sector. I think what we're trying to do is say, there is a role for you to go not only at a startup or a Google, but also to do a stint in government or work in the nonprofit sector, or at least be on a nonprofit board. There's so many ways that tech people can bring value to society beyond choosing to take a giant pay cut and working for a nonprofit. Maybe you're a two-earner couple, and this is your turn to do a passion project for the next 3 to 5 years, and then maybe you'll trade off for the next round. These are all things that I've seen people on my team make those choices.
So if someone were to take one of those kind of paths, those trajectories that you just described, where you go from, say, a Google to a Tech for Good company, maybe work in the government sector, What is the important component that you would learn in a career? What would you really get out of the working in the tech for good startup or a company during the course of that kind of career?
Well, most of the people we're talking about are ambitious in some way for their career, right? And it's not just about income, right? It's also about accomplishment. And the thing about working in government, if you go work at the VA, you're going to be talking about helping millions of vets. That's a bigger story, the more compelling portfolio experience to have than I was one of, 75 engineers who built this, component of, a semiconductor plant or, you get to, in some ways, sometimes take on a position of greater responsibility. It's kind of like going to work for a startup, right? Part of the case of going to work for a startup is everyone has to do multiple jobs. And if you manage to survive a startup and accomplish something, even if the startup failed, you're more hireable at a higher level inside a traditional tech company because you've had more of those skills that people want to have. And I think it's that same kind of thing as about public service or the nonprofit sector. I want to make you more employable. And I've had people work for my organization and then go to Google and make a boatload of money. And then, actually, this particular guy, who's an MIT grad, now leads bike tours in Napa Valley because he can, And so I want people to have more autonomy in their life. And I think this is more of the nature of careers nowadays is, a single path is less and less common outside of like academia where that is kind of the main path.
So it's not just developing, skills that are transferable.
Yeah.
It's that there's actually fundamental skills and experiences that you can get by taking that tech for social good
and make the
job.
compelling story that you made this choice,
And you made the
to work
choice.
on something that mattered,
Right.
that people can get. When I said I help blind people read, people got that that's what I was doing and that was cool, that was a cool use of AI, right? And more accessible than detecting credit card fraud, which is another great application of AI. It's just not as fun.
Not as much fun, but very profitable.
Very profitable, and a lot of people work in that. So
I want to now turn a little bit just to give folks some sense of like what's actually in the book.
Yeah.
So chapter 2, it was hilarious. Okay, I'm reading chapter 2, and the title of chapter 2 is "The Top Bad Ideas in Tech for Good." Now, I don't want you to give all of the bad ideas because I want people to buy the book.
Yeah.
But can you tell us the number one bad idea?
The overarching thing is technology you think people should use instead of what they actually will use, which is a terrible error in product design. But oh God, it's hard to pick. Is it the app that no one will download, the giant database in the sky that no one will look at, or whatever the latest fad is? Blockchain. Everyone had to do a blockchain thing 7 years ago, and no one figured out how to use blockchain for anything good in the social sector, at least not yet. So, and it's not that these things fail all the time. They just fail 95% of the time, or in the case of blockchain, 99.99% of the time. But because what happens in Silicon Valley is we learn what is profitable or useful for each of these kind of ideas and what's not useful. And in the nonprofit sector, people just say, well, you got to have an app. And it's like, well, most people don't need an app for that, right? So that's a lot of the dynamic going on is people think of what people should want instead of actually asking people or testing with actual users, what pain point do they have, and does my product actually help solve your pain point?
Great advice. Having done a couple startups myself, I can tell you that's great advice. I wish I would have read the book before that.
Well, I'm not the only person giving that advice. That's kind of the user-centered design, agile, lean, blah, blah, blah.
Exactly.
Thing. But we all learned that over the last 20 or 30 years through hard experience.
Exactly. So one of the other chapters talks a lot about funding.
Yeah.
And because funding is obviously, if you're going to start up a business, having access to capital and funding is really important. Yeah. But here you're talking about building companies that are building technology for solving big, complicated problems.
Yeah.
And in this world, a lot of that funding is going to come from foundations.
Yep.
Foundations are focused on short-term funding and short-term goals.
Yep.
Where the technology build requires longer-term funding.
Yep.
So how do you figure out how to fund if you're going to base you're going to base your project on shorter-term funding sources from foundations.
Yeah, so we're following, when we do a new nonprofit tech company, we're following a similar path to what a for-profit startup does, but we're doing it with 1/10 or 100th of money, right? So we have a big differential. But just as when I'm doing a startup, you've got angel investors, and you've got primary VCs, and you have mezzanine funders, and you get acquired or you go public, right? Those same stages go on in the nonprofit sector. So when I'm starting something, I need $100,000 to try out a crazy idea and build some prototypes and run around and see if people like it. And the majority of those won't go anywhere. But I haven't spent more than 100 grand. Maybe I've only spent 10 grand. And maybe that 10 grand came out of a slush fund somewhere, not a good slush fund, and so then when we actually need to get the $1 million or the $3 million, we're going to have to piece that together from a bunch of risk-taking donors. And these are not your typical run-of-the-mill donors. These are going to be tech foundations founded by tech funders. They get tech. Tech companies are often good funders of this kind of stuff because they get tech risk. Sometimes we even found some government funders who are willing to take a risk on something and had a program that allowed them to take risk. And then by the time you've got a working prototype, and maybe even you've launched it in a single area or in a single country, then going to more traditional foundations and saying, hey, if you liked what we did in Zambia, why don't you fund us to do it in Zimbabwe or Thailand? And then for a lot of these projects, this is technology. It's got margins, right? The whole dynamic of technology, you just spend a few $1 million. Now you've created a product that costs almost nothing to crank out extra copies of. You can come up with ways to charge rich country nonprofits more money and charge African or Asian nonprofits maybe 1/10 as much. You have that differential pricing. Coke uses it, but they still got syrup that they have to move. We are talking about bits. And so we have a lot of flexibility on pricing. And my dream for a lot of these projects is within the first 4 or 5 years, they should get to where the majority of their budget comes from customers who can afford to pay it. And often, even free and open source software still has to have a revenue model. So we're just following in the footsteps of what the tech industry has done, but changing it to do the maximum impact while breaking even as opposed to make the maximum money.
So when you came at this from the tech world,
Yeah.
where you had a lot of connections in the VC space, and you knew a lot of people, you had access to people, these people who are willing to take a risk, right, to work on a social good problem.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people come from the perspective of they have a problem they want to solve, a social problem they want to solve, and they want to figure out a way to build a technology to do that.
Yeah.
They don't have those connections. How do you help them jumpstart this process of getting access, at least to that initial round of funding?
Well, one of the things that's happened in the university system is that social enterprise competitions have become a thing in a lot of campuses.
Right.
And so what you've got is hungry technologists saying, hey, I want to work on something important. I have no idea what. And then maybe they've got a student who comes with the lived experience of being homeless at one point in their life, or maybe they come from a country that's not as economically well off as the United States. And so they put them together, and I've been judging those competitions now for 25 years. Starting about 10 or 15 years ago, I started spotting things like that could go. And as a matter of fact, I talk about one of them in the book, which is Talking Points. This is a immigrant student. She was in an MBA program at Stanford, and she had experience with immigrant parents who didn't speak English. And her breakthrough was, instead of working on ed tech to raise the sort of educational performance of underserved kids, she realized that if she could help parents who don't speak English or Spanish, to engage with the teacher, that would actually have a major impact on the kids' performance. It turns out that it's correct. And here in California, if the parents are more engaged, truancy goes down. School district gets more money if kids show up. So not only do the kids do better, but the school district gets more money, 10 times as much money as it costs to get HJ's product for their school district. So, and it's that interesting hook, is I think if she hadn't been the child of immigrants, she wouldn't have known about this problem. And she went over to Oakland, and that Oakland was her first school district. And Oakland is kind of like some of the school districts here in LA. Pretty diverse, heavily immigrant student population where the parents speak a gazillion languages. And Google Translate plus some tweaks got them on the road to a wonderful project that is a very successful nonprofit with a revenue model, but it's free to any teacher who wants to use it.
So the book is full of lots of really great, interesting examples like that. And a number of these examples have a real global focus, right?
Yeah.
Can you tell us from some of these global examples, one really important technical design lesson that you learned?
Well, I'll come back to human-centered design, prototyping, testing in the community, gathering data. I mean, tech companies, if I was starting a new startup and putting it through Y Combinator, which is the leading incubator, the only thing they want you to work on is, do you have product market fit? That is like everything else, we're just going to outsource that. Do your customers love your product? And the same thing is true when you're trying to solve a social problem. When you're designing a new program to help people, even if it's not technical, do people actually engage? Do they come back? Does it actually help solve their problem? So that human-centered design component is amazing. And I'll give you an example of one of the internationalist groups. Because, I'm an AI guy from way back. Some of the most cool AI applications in the nonprofit sector are from the global south, not from the US, right? So there's a guy, and he was educated, I think, at Caltech or MIT, but he was at Microsoft Research. And they ran a trial saying, if we give local farmers advice in video form, 2 or 3 minute videos, from a farmer who looks like them, speaking their mother tongue, whatever their language is, farmers take that advice. And suddenly, they're making more money, and their family is, they have enough money to send their daughter to school, the social kind of outcomes we want. And so they did this he published the paper, and then Microsoft Research said, okay, you've published the paper, now move on. He's like, no. So he went off and started a nonprofit, and it's called Digital Green, and now they have 10,000 videos from all over India and East Africa, and they trained a large language model on these videos, and now they have something called Farmer Chat, and if you ask a question in your language, it could be Swahili or could be Tamil or whatever language you actually speak, 90+% of the time, it will show you a video in your language of a farmer that looks like you speaking your local dialect, explaining how to solve that problem. That is terrific, and it works.
It's a great example.
Yeah.
Now, unfortunately, you brought up AI.
Yeah.
So every conversation today seems to revolve around AI.
Yeah.
But you were really, in AI very early, and really in some ways a real pioneer. Can you give us a good example, other than the one you just gave us, which is, I think, one good example, but maybe another good example, where you think AI can really be used for social good and not just hype?
Yeah. So, one of the important papers of the last year is AI is normal technology, right? It's an exciting advance. It's a bigger than average advance. But all the laws of there are humans in this system, and does the AI actually help the humans or not? That's still true of AI, Gen AI, as it is of any other technology. And so, some of the great examples that I've seen, there's something like the Harvard Business Review of the Indian development sector, Indian Development Review, and they've got 3,000 articles. They've trained a chatbot that is like having an expert who's read all 3,000 articles, and you ask them any question about development in India or development in general, and it will surface, the top 10 papers. It'll summarize the 3 things they agree about, the 3 things they disagree about, and it won't make up stuff, right? That's a great example of doing this. Another group that I like is Same. It's an LGBT group for African youth. Being a gay youth in Africa is really tough. And this is basically a mental health app that if you go through this cognitive behavioral therapy, which is delivered through WhatsApp, so it's all text, if you get through it, you go from being severely depressed to depressed, or from depressed to mildly depressed. So it actually helps your mental health. This model is going to be something where we're going to be able to tackle some of the mental health issues of the entire world because you need fewer humans. It's using AI not to make up stuff, but to get you to complete the standard lessons that they have a research result saying it works, right? So so the common thread is, we got a real problem in the world, we've got a technology that we then identify after we look at the problem is a good fit for the problem, and my joke is, hey, 80 or 90% of these things fail. The Gen AI applications, MIT wrote a paper recently on this. So those are good numbers. Blockchain was 99.9% failure. So 80 or 90%, that's actually like a great result. It's all about, that's what we do with the next new generation technology is venture capital and the companies try to figure out what it's actually good for. And we're still in that phase with Gen AI.
Right.
The nonprofit sector is 1 or 2 years behind, which actually for the nonprofit sector is amazing.
Pretty good.
To only be 2 years behind, yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things that I noticed when I read this book and heard you talk a few times about some of these examples of where AI can be used for social good. We hear a lot of hype about large language models, frontier models, all these huge models trained on huge copious amounts of data with these huge data centers eating up electricity and using all the water. The models you're talking about don't require that, right? These are small scale models that can be built by tech for good companies where data could be protected. They can be built in sensitive ways that work well for particular communities. Do you think that's the future of tech and in particular AI in social good?
I do, because the thing is that if the nonprofit sector is 1 or 2 years behind the times, well, by the time we waited a year, the open source models that can run on a laptop are as good as the super expensive, super energy consuming models were like a year or two ago, right? And the nonprofit sector doesn't have the money to spend on the leading edge models, assuming that someday they actually start charging with the cost, because right now they're losing money hand over fist, as well publicized. So I do see, people in the nonprofit sector are worried about the environmental impact of what they're doing, but again, it's not, if you actually think about that and what you're saving in terms of the social impact, the energy you invest for these open source models is trivial compared to the good that you can deliver. Because there's so much stuff you can do. I'll give you one of the projects that we're running right now is kind of like the software for 911 for kids around the world. So you have these telephone-oriented helplines that we brought text to, and texting is a lot cheaper. So, and just by bringing them text, they can serve 40% more kids with the same staff. And then what AI did we bring them? Summarization of an hour-long text chat. That saves them 8 or 10 minutes of contact. That 8 or 10 minutes goes to helping the next kid. And now they're going to go from 40% more kids helping the same staff to 60%. And our big breakthrough was, does a summarization model work as well on Zambian and Jamaican English as it does on American Canadian? Yes, it does. Because summarization is actually not at the bleeding edge. But it uses a large language model. And if they spend 20 or 30 seconds checking to make sure it didn't make a big mistake, the summaries are better than what the humans write. So anyway, so these opportunities are all over the place. You don't have to fire all your staff. And that's one of the examples I have in there is someone who fired all their staff and it went badly. Replaced it with a chatbot that lasted 3 days. So.
That's a great story too. You got to read the book for that one though.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't forget questions. Scan the code if you've got questions, because we'll start to turn to audience questions in just a sec.
Yeah.
I want to pivot now to talk a little bit about Caltech and some of your advice for folks in our community, in particular our grad students and undergrads. The thing, again, that I think was really interesting to read and I think is really important about your story is how you made that pivot. Back in the origin story, how you made the pivot. What advice do you have for students in particular about how to recognize that pivot moment and how to be brave to take advantage of it, but also it's risky?
Yeah, it's hard to do that. And one of the things I suggest to people is give it a try. One of the things that we have, and this is kind of a side thing, is we have a fellowship program designed for people who are going to pivot out of regular industry to spend a year with us and try out the Tech for Good world. We pay them $80,000 a year, which is a lot less than they could be making, but we give them health insurance. And if you've been laid off, and you like it, and industry's in recession as it is every 3 or 4 years. But I think I want people to just get themselves, find an issue you care about, meet people who are affected by that issue, or learn about that issue, or at least read about that issue, become educated. Because the more that you're aware of the problems in the world, whether you care about climate or women's rights or education, whatever it is, if you kind of are up to speed on that, and you're this technology demigod or goddess, right? The idea is that you'll make that connection of, oh, wait a minute. Now, I mean, when I was here, I knew theoretically what blind people experience. I didn't know any blind people, but I mean, they're in every major religious book, help the blind, right? So I kind of felt like I had that sort of instruction. So I was trying to think, oh gosh. But I think that same kind of connection, and sometimes it isn't even about making the leap yourself, but saying, hey, I've started a company, or I'm in charge of a product, or I'm in charge of a technology that we've helped invent. And when you figure out that here's this great social application, it's not going to make enough money, don't kill your idea then. Either be willing to consider how you might do it, or be open to somebody else using your technology to do that. And more, whether it's business school students or engineers or scientists, want to be involved in the problems of the day. I think you're seeing this with the new generation of students, right?
Yes.
They're a little bit less focused on the almighty dollar. And so this shows up in a number of different ways. Some people go to a stint for the government, maybe not this year, but because
or not right now.
or not right now, but there are, and I do think that for people who have gotten a little bit further in their career, joining a nonprofit board in an issue that you care about, you're going to be meeting people who know that issue. They may not know technology or science as well as you do. And I often hear people say, but that's not my specialty. Anyone who's technical is so much more technical than any nonprofit board member or staff member you're likely to encounter. You're going to be God's gift to their IT department, even if all you know how to do is like reboot your PC, right? So it's that kind of a role where there is this gap in between let's call it the technological experts and most of society, a gap that's been growing over the last 50 years. And I think it's time that we started shrinking it and trying to make technology relevant for the lives of the average human being, as opposed to how do we make a few billionaires a few more $1 billion, which is the way the tech industry has been working quite well for the last 10 years.
Yeah, so we define success in that world, though, by the billions of dollars, right? So in the tech for good sector, how do you define what the key performance metrics are going to be? So, like what I was thinking of was like if we had the Caltech Board of Trustees sitting in front of us here, what are the kind of metrics that would impress them? Because they look at financial returns and patents and things like that.
Well, I mean. Any organization that has assets has a financial manager who only cares about managing the assets. Whether you're a foundation or whether you're a university who's managing the endowment. Forget about that, right? The question is, why does the university exist? Well, a place like Caltech exists to push the frontiers of science. So, some of that measurement is retrospective. You win a Nobel. You get a faculty member into the national academies. You are top in your field by citations, right? These are very real metrics that are not about money, but are about impact. And so when it comes to the nonprofit sector, especially around tech for good, what I say is, imagine that you are the program manager for this new tech for good enterprise, and you're in charge of it. What would that person, what would that woman want to know whether she was being successful? Pick those metrics. Technology projects come with data collection and metrics kind of built in,
right.
and then go off and sell to your donors why those are the metrics they should measure your impact on. And if you pick them, they are overlapping with actually helping the community, and convince the donors that they should measure you on that. And I think that the Caltech Board of Trustees or group of foundation trustees are looking for that high impact grant. Where is that grant that was 10 times more successful than our average grant, that changed an entire field? Well, it's the same in the tech for good sector. I mean, one of the things I advocate for is, can you figure out how to move the whole field from here to here? And for me, I've had, partly because of no one else working in this field. One of my big breakthroughs was helping move from audio cassette tapes for the blind to ebooks. Somewhat before the Kindle came along. But it turns out that ebooks are roughly 50 times cheaper, rather than sending audio cassette tapes through the mail. And our Library of Congress was sending audio cassette tapes through the mail still like in the last 10 years, right? 25 years after that technology was obsolete. The nonprofit sector is often that far back. So there are these kind of opportunities of where a tech intervention could deliver a unit of social good, to get very metric oriented, for a fifth or a tenth of the cost. And these are out there partly because they're not financially attractive enough to attract the market. So some tech for good entrepreneur has to figure out, how am I going to do this? And the great thing about nonprofit tech ventures is a break-even $2 million a year nonprofit is a giant success in the charity sector and a dismal and utter failure in Silicon Valley. I mean, the fact that I told my investors it was $1 million market. I was wrong. We were $5 million a year within 3 years. They wouldn't have cared. That was the same to them. They needed it to be a $300 or $500 million a year company to justify investing that kind of money. So, but if you're okay with being a $2 or $4 million a year enterprise, that could be 25 people working on a really important social problem, making a living, and making an impact.
So I've got a million questions, but I know there's some audience questions, but I got one more question, Michael.
Okay.
One more?
All right.
Just one more question?
All right, sorry. I got
it's a simple
too enthusiastic
one.
for all,
It's a simple one. Yeah. Okay, so if you had the opportunity to go back in time, and that young Jim was walking into Venerable for the first time, and you could tap him on the shoulder and tell him one thing, what would it be?
Engage with the faculty here.
That was not prompted.
No?
That was not prompted.
No, I didn't know that question.
No, that was not prompted.
No,
Great. Thank you.
I mean, and partly because I was a little bit more outgoing than the average Caltech nerd. I mean, I got unbelievable help from my faculty members, and Jerry Pine got me a job at Fermilab after my freshman year. Lee Silver got me an interview with the head of the main space flight directorate, George Abbey, because I wanted to become an astronaut. I did not become an astronaut, but it was a great opportunity, right? And my professor who was in the class, he mentored me, and of course the Caltech connection. Ben Rosen, who's the former chair, he was my first big venture capitalist, right? So the thing is that I didn't really get how the relationships I'd built with faculty members and my fellow students, how when I became a tech entrepreneur in Silicon Valley, how much I depended on my classmates. Because, we all thought we were all like crazy, stupid people, right? We didn't really think we were that smart or that good. We always thought we were just nerds, right? And then you got in the real world and go, holy Toledo, I need to go hire that guy out of his PhD program because he'll be awesome for this AI company, right? And I did. My favorite, I came to Caltech to recruit another guy, and got into the interview room. He said, why don't we go over to my place and have gins and tonics? Yeah, he was hired on the spot. Yeah, he went to Caltech. I knew he was going to be great, and he knew to. Anyway, that's probably not an appropriate story these days, but man, it worked, right? So that interpersonal connection thing didn't come naturally, but it turned out to be really important, and it started with the faculty.
Excellent, great. Well, thank you.
You bet.
So, Michael.
Let's give an intermission clap for what we've just. We've got a number of questions. Just use the QR code there, and you're going to send them to the tablet I have right in front of me. We know about Doctors Without Borders. I have one quick question here. We know about law firms that will dedicate some of their lawyers' time to doing pro bono work. It has become the culture in those two fields. How much of the culture of Silicon Valley exists where these big firms expect some of their lead employees to give some time at the cost of the employer to nonprofits?
It turns out that this movement started about 25 years ago with the founders of eBay donating pre-IPO stock, Jeff Skoll and Piero Medjar, Mark Benioff, the founder of Salesforce. this turned into a movement called Pledge 1%. And it turns out that many of the most successful companies started in the last 25 years have taken the Pledge 1% pledge. And it means they give 1% of their equity before they go public, 1% of their product, 1% of their employee time paid for by the company, and 1% of their profits. And so as a result, companies that most people haven't heard of, Okta and PagerDuty and Twilio are some of my biggest funders, because it turns out that they now have tens of millions of dollars to give away, and they like technology. So that's one movement. And then from the foundation side, the Ford Foundation has tried to start the Public Interest Technology Movement, PIT, not the most mellifluous abbreviation, but it's modeled after the public interest law movement that they started in the 60s. And now there's a Public Interest Technology Network that's in 40 universities, where they try to do programs. And so, part of my book tour will be going to speak to some of these groups. So I think there is this move, and people ask tech founders who are not renowned for being nice people necessarily, but the Pledge 1% founders all defend. They say, because we're a Pledge 1% company, because we talk about the social impact of our grants, of our volunteer time, people want to work for our company more than they want to work for Meta.
There's one entry here that comes in over and over again. Somebody named Anonymous keeps sending in questions. I serve on several nonprofit boards. How would you suggest seeking our partnership with tech experts? How can I figure out who might make a great partner?
So there is a new group started in the last 2 years called board.dev. That's the URL. And the goal of board.dev is to bring more technical leaders onto nonprofit boards. The theory being, and I'm on 5 nonprofit boards right now, I always look, is there a lawyer on the board? Because I'm a volunteer and I don't want to be running risks. I don't want to bet my house by being a volunteer. Is there a finance top on the board who can actually look at the books and know whether there's a fraud problem going on or embezzlement? And now I think we want to set up a norm where there's a tech person on the board to worry about the data of the people that we serve. Because nonprofits collect data on vulnerable people about the thing that makes them vulnerable, and they're not always that good about handling it. So board.dev is designed to do a couple things. One is to help technical people make that transition to board service, because let's say the nonprofit world has a different culture than the tech world, and so a little of that, but also to help non-technical board leaders ask questions about the technology that they're using. And I mean, one of the big questions that board.dev, and I'm an advisor to board.dev, and we help, are we feeding the confidential data of our clients into commercial AI models for them to train on? This is a giant sin, and it's happening all over the nonprofit sector. So, so one of the things is you should have an AI policy that says we don't do that. We'll only use AI when we know the data won't be misappropriated by the for-profits.
What are effective ways to reorient nonprofit workers, the sector, to use the technology in their day-to-day work?
So this is a general problem in putting new technology in organizations, and it's always underestimated. For-profit organizations, especially big ones, resist change just like nonprofit organizations resist change. And people are worried about change. So there's a whole set of principles about how you do change management is the field of effort of engage the workers on this, especially if you're going to change the fundamental system that they're operating on. And even though we knew this, we underestimated it when we introduced these, this new call center technology. There were a whole bunch of helpline operators who are used to doing telephone operators, and they didn't want to text, right? And so we had to actually deal with that. The other thing that helps a lot is to have a champion from the team, right? Because usually when there's technology going into an organization, it's your peers who are the people who help you with using the technology. I mean, sometimes you get trained, but really it's, Mary in the corner who knows how to get that report out of the system. And so what I always say is identify the champion who is not the ED, because they actually don't know what frontline staff are doing, right? Get the the person who trains the staff internally, the mentor teacher or the mentor counselor, whoever it is, get them on your side, have them advise you on what the product technology has to do, or when you're implementing the technology, how to adapt it. And you'll probably be in a much better road than, because top-down forcing of technology has a pretty bad track record of working in real human organizations.
We have 3 questions that I'm going to read to you because I think they all come back to a common theme here.
Yeah.
What ethical guidelines should be in place to ensure that technology serves the common good? What are some of the ethical factors and nuances you have to consider, such as AI bias, when using tech for social good? And success is defined by metrics, i.e. data, but humans have nuances. How do you design metrics that also capture transformation without reducing people to numbers? So I think that those are some
Whoa,
of the
that's more than one question.
Yeah, those are 3 definite questions. Yeah.
But make sure, keep me honest on this. So I would say that nonprofits almost uniformly want to do the right thing when it comes to technology and data. And the tech sector has not served them well, right? So, I saw a nonprofit happily showing me a map in some Google visualization problem where they had every household in a village, and you could say, which question had we asked, and red or green answers. And one of them was a domestic violence question. And I'm like, wait a minute. I could drive to that village. I don't speak Spanish, but I'll get a translator. And I could go to this house and say, so your husband beats you. And the nonprofit leader, well, in theory, I'm like, no, in practice, this is a public map. This is totally unethical. And the nonprofit, this is a nonprofit that prided themselves on their ethics. They just had no idea. The tech industry had handed them such a sharp scalpel, they had cut through one of their arteries and they weren't even aware that the blood was spewing out. It was that bad. That's happening all over the place. And so one of the things that we're working on, this is kind of a project that I'm going to be spending more and more of my time on, it's called the Better Deal for Data, and it's a set of basically ethical and practical principles around how nonprofits should use data. One, don't claim ownership in the data. It actually belongs to the people in the community. You're there to use the data for their interests, not your interests. That means you will not sell the data to the data brokers or Meta or whoever it is. You're not going to sell donor names for money either. That's not cool. Even donors deserve protections, right? If you do research, you'll scrub it of their personal information and give them a free copy of it, and you'll make a legally binding commitment to it. So this is something we're hoping to launch in the next few months. So, because one of the things that happened, and it's like a lot of reforms, happens because something bad is happening. Right now, bad things are happening when it comes to data of vulnerable people, and it's being exploited, right? And so 15 years ago, we had a rash of child abuse claims in the social sector, Oxfam scandal, or other things. Now, no one who works in the child field, any child field, can get a grant unless they have a child protection policy. I want in 3 or 4 years that no nonprofit collects data about vulnerable people without adopting a data safeguarding policy that has these kind of ethical norms. So that's one piece. The middle question, or I can go to the last one, which is the hardest, but I'd rather answer the middle question first.
What ethical guidelines should be in place to ensure that technology serves the common good? Was that the one?
Yeah, I mean, I've already the Better Deal for Data, an AI use policy. These are some things. I mean, the thing about the nonprofit sector that is good is that they have a social mission. And most nonprofits actually maintain their focus on the social mission. So you have a structure where you have a touchstone. To serve your mission, you have to be ethical in the use of these things. To uphold your promise. The number one issue that's happening with tech and data is the erosion of trust. Right? People don't trust this stuff. And based on what they've seen, they have reasons not to trust. The nonprofit sector is better positioned for that trust. We just need to have their practices and the technology they use be worthy of the trust that people want to put into them. So I think that's that. And then the last one was, how do we not reduce people to numbers? And this is something that you have to be careful about, because Silicon Valley often reduces something to a single metric. Are you making a boatload of money? And you know, I've ragged a little bit on Meta, but you know, a lot of the bad things that have happened about Meta, I mean, I think that most times when they had a choice on their product design about something that enhanced child safety or made them more money, I think they always picked make more money, right? And I hate to say that about a company, but I think that it's what's happened. And that's because that's all they can care about is making money. And so I think that when you go to the nonprofit sector, you don't want to adopt that behavior wholeheartedly. You know, one of the things that happened is, you know, we're very proud of using ebooks. Well, and the books on tape have gone digital, and there are some dyslexic students and blind students who prefer books on tape. I like to think most prefer ebooks, but you know, I'm not there telling people that they absolutely have to use ebooks if they prefer this. And I think that in some ways, as long as you keep the fundraisers out of the picture, the program people tend to be pretty respectful of their competition. When I have people moving out of the tech industry into the charitable sector, they often regard the competitors as the enemy. You know, they got the order, they got the business, we didn't, they're bad. We have to fight them tooth and nail. In the nonprofit sector, I say, look, our competitors share our mission. You know, if they get the grant, kids are gonna get help. Not as well as if we got the grant, but they're still gonna get helped. The actual enemy is people who abuse kids, right? And you pick any social cause, there is an actual enemy. There are people who portray this thing. Your nonprofit peers are your collaborators in going after that. And that mind shift takes a little bit. So the nonprofit sector has an easier time continuing to weight the human side of the equation rather than solely being numbers-based. And we try to keep that balance because, frankly, people went into the nonprofit sectors to serve other people, not to hit numbers.
You mentioned about the code of conduct.
Yeah.
Is there already communication with, there's a national organization called Independent Sector. And are you dealing with anybody there yet, or are they in communication with people like you about the code of conduct?
I think that we're in closer touch with BoardSource, which is the #1 resource for nonprofit boards, with board.dev. And yes, we are going to, with sort of the data concept, we're going to that. We also have a group that has got an AI-driven AI policy generator, which is a little basic, but if you don't have anything, it covers all the bases. And so I think that there's a lot of people starting to work on these different elements, and I think most nonprofits want to do the right thing, and I think that over time, donors are also going to say, if you're going to get a grant from us, you need to be doing the right thing.
How do you balance revealing tech for good when others can use it for bad?
I would say design signals intent, right? I mean, you know, we made crypto for human rights activists to protect human rights activists from the perpetrators of human rights, often governments, right? And people say, but crypto could be used by cyber criminals and spies and organized crime. And the answer is yes, but we had designed a tool that was designed to work really well for a human rights defender and wasn't really that great for, I don't know, passing illicit funds across borders, right? So even if the base technology, you know, a lot of science can be used for multiple purposes. By the time you've actually engineered a product, if you spend all this energy focusing on a social good application, the odds that it's going to be that usable by the bad people is actually pretty low.
You touched on about the 40% more because of use of AI. Here's a question.
No, that's before the use of AI.
Yeah.
40% before the use of AI, just by bringing the technology into like this century.
Well, the question here then
AI on top of that.
It says, in what ways do you think AI could empower small nonprofits to overcome resource constraints and scale their outreach and fundraising impact?
So I wrote a piece last year called, Should I Be Using AI for This? And the centerpiece of the article is the nonprofit AI treasure map. You know, and it's designed to be like find your own adventure as a nonprofit ED who's not very technical. And the map is divided into two parts. And I called it admin or back office part and the program part. Now, the admin part is like when you're using ChatGPT to write a better grant application. And nonprofits are all doing this, right? And the only thing you have to avoid is turning in a grant proposal you haven't proofread that the AI generated, because it's gonna have mistakes in it, right? So that's in the treasure map, is like, review the mistakes and fix them. And basically I said, in these sort of things like, whether it's writing grant applications or writing software, I mean, there are products in this area, they're not that expensive, and if you know how to use them, they make people who kind of know what they're doing, makes them more powerful. The problem is that if you don't know enough to tell whether the AI is making a mistake, it's probably not the right tool for you. So I'm recommending people do a lot of this. In the program area, we're talking about people in crisis coming to nonprofits, and people should not be deploying AI willy-nilly. We should not be inflicting bad AI on good people who are looking for help. And unfortunately, there was kind of a rash of that, and continues to happen. And the nonprofits that are doing a pretty good job in the program area they have at least a small tech team, and the average nonprofit doesn't. So the number one point of that whole article and the treasure map is the average nonprofit should be waiting for a product. You can try a product. You can call your peer across town or in the next state and say, did it work for you? Did you save more time than it cost you in fixing the mistakes? And so that's my number one advice, is just wait for a product. The average restaurant should be not writing their own software. The average nonprofit should not be trying to invent their own AI product on a $500,000 or $1 million a year budget. That just does not compute.
Given nonprofit funding heavily depends on foundations, how do we normalize investment in tech within the sector?
Foundations are a weird way to raise money. The whole joke is if you've met one foundation, you've met one foundation, right? And it's a very American thing. I mean, it's not as common in a lot of the rest of the world. And I think it's a good thing about American sort of society, but it's a hard way to raise money for things. But until we have another option, and of course their importance has gone way up with the withdrawal of government support from, at the national level, internationally and domestically, and a lot of state and local, and metro area kind of things are also seeing funding cuts because of the flow down of this. So the foundation sector is becoming more important. And the foundation sector is not about equalization. That's, each foundation has its own strategy set by its board or its living donor. And so that's the world we have. The thing that I'm trying to get the foundation sector to support more is building some common tools, common standards, and a small number of foundations are actually for that because, and of course, I love developing open source software. Not because the average nonprofit is going to ever do any software development on top of our open source software, but it's sort of a statement of freedom, not charging a license fee, and the idea that rather than every nonprofit for themselves, if we can work with 20 different countries and build a common platform, it's likely that the next 20 countries are going to love it, right? And so this shared approach, it's not that common. Bigger nonprofits tend to build their own software for their own internal uses, just like bigger companies tend to build software for their own internal uses. But we need more of these specialist products, and I'm trying to advocate for it because you can do that sort of leveling of, the better funded nonprofits will pay more, and the less funded nonprofits, even in the US, will pay less, or maybe even get the product for free.
Is there a consideration for unintended consequences? Solving these types of problems seems to have a bigger risk other than lost money.
Yeah, people usually don't think about what could go wrong. And I'm a big fan, especially of, imagining what are the threat models to this idea? How could it go badly wrong, right? How could someone abuse this? I'll pick an example. Hey, we're collecting data from domestic violence survivors. Well, what if someone who's a perpetrator of domestic violence is good at tech and manages to find out where their partner is located because your security's bad. These are real challenges, right? That's the unintended consequences as you collect and keep data. One of the things that's gone on, this is a very real example, is that there are a lot of immigrant-serving organizations in Texas, right? And has been for many years. Starting a few years ago, they all stopped collecting data about immigration status because to hold that data was to put the communities that they serve at risk because the Attorney General of Texas would subpoena you for your data. So the idea is like, we just don't collect that data. And when donors say, well, how do I know the immigration status of the people you serve? They say, well, anecdotally, 80+%. But I can't tell you that because we don't collect that data. And we think it's more important to not collect that data and protect the people we serve than to collect that data for your reporting.
There's a marketing question here. What is the role of marketing and how does it differ from for-profit tech marketing?
You have no money.
No money for marketing, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, I'll use some examples of, so we had, one of our projects was the largest national special ed project. It was basically the school library for disabled kids in the US. We won the national contract. And so any student who's blind or dyslexic or has a physical disability gets away reading a book and they need a book, we're committed to getting it to them. And so what marketing mechanisms could we afford? We bought lists of special educators. And email marketing traditionally doesn't work that well. Well, you would get 30 or 40% open rates. Because if you're a special ed teacher and someone's saying, I have a free solution to one of your biggest problems, and it's funded by the government, they'll open your email and sign up for it. So that was a cheap marketing technique that generally doesn't work that well, but for our audience, the fact that we were a nonprofit, people were more inclined to trust us, try us out. And then we would get teacher ambassadors in a metro area who's like, go out and when you have the meeting of all the special ed teachers in your district, you tell them about us, right? Or parents. It turns out that often a parent of a dyslexic or a blind student is the best salesperson we've ever had, My Johnny's reading now, and he never used to read. Well, that's what every parent of a dyslexic kid wants to hear. So we rely a lot on word of mouth, earned media, get a news story, and being front and center at the conferences where people showed up. For example, every year we would go to the National Federation of the Blind event, and we'd also come to the Cal State Northridge Conference, because it turns out Cal State Northridge runs one of the largest assistive technology conferences in the world. We're there every year. Why? Because everyone needed to hear about us. So you find ways to do this with, not a lot of money, but there are ways to do it.
How do you determine when your technology is good enough, or when your technology for good is good enough and stop refining it?
You don't. Modern technology, you can't stand still, right? The minute you stop developing it, it starts decaying, right? And that's especially true if you're doing anything that involves software on the internet. Because, there could be a security hole in a library that you're using, and if you don't fix it, you're putting people at risk. So, and this flies in the face with the way the nonprofit sector is funded, which is the project funding. You get a grant for a year. Well, all the projects we do, we have to plan like they're going to be around for 10 or 15 years, and there is this constant need to invest in maintaining the software just to stay in place. And then, ideally, working on the next 5 things that your user community has prioritized.
What I'm hearing is it's really 2 different subjects being discussed here. One is the technology and the other is data. Are you finding that there's certain sectors of the nonprofit world that are more inclined to be looking for data to deal with what they're doing with than others?
Yes, but sometimes that's cultural in the actual field. So the field that does the best job with data, surprise, public health, right? Because public health, medicine, has had a data culture for a long time whether it's clinical trials for doing drugs. But so if I want to know like where's the gold standard in the nonprofit sector, I'm going to go look at basically at public health. Other fields are trying to catch up with those kind of practices. Now, of course, you talk to someone in public health and they make all sorts of excuses on how crappy their technology is, but you're like, yes, but it's so much better than education or human rights or conservation or fill in the blank. So it's it's an interesting dynamic there. But the thing is that the nonprofit sector, the challenge we have, and let's call it the balkanization challenge. 5 big tech companies in Silicon Valley each have data on more than 1 billion people. You probably would need 1 million nonprofits to find the data on 1 billion people. And getting those people to cooperate is really tough. That's one of the goals of our data governance initiative, is to make it easier to do data sharing for social good impact. But people are starting to do this. I mean, languages that no one thought anyone would be working on now have chatbots that actually work pretty well in them. And so I don't know, we're making progress on this, but one of the goals, I think, of, modernizing the nonprofit sector is raising the ability to work with data for understanding what you're doing that's working and what's not working, which is about the human impact that it has. Because to use AI, AI is like, advanced AI tool is like, step 5 on a 5-step process. And if your nonprofit is stuck on step 1, you can't apply AI because you wouldn't recognize if it was doing a good or bad job. You have to have enough of a data culture and be using the data to design better programs, justify your impact, raise more money, change policy. And then AI is the thing you do once you actually have some data and know what problem AI might help you solve in your programs, as opposed to fitting a 500-word answer in a 250-word grant application box, which ChatGPT is pretty good for.
I'm afraid we're coming on the last question just because
I
of time.
figured we would be getting close because, there's book signing ahead,
we want
right?
that to happen. I'm going to and this ties back to something we talked about before the evening started, which was you've worked in Kenya and other countries, and this question is, what happened to it? Is it better for a developed world nonprofit to empower a similar organization in the developing world to avoid a colonial approach to aid?
The global development community talked about localization, which was moving power to local organizations for 10 years and made almost no progress on it. And by the current administration cutting off foreign aid, and also many European countries cutting off foreign aid, it's happening by default. Okay, so more and more countries, more and more local groups are having to fill the gap because there is no more money coming from the rich world to do those things. The reason it's funny is, so we have a climate change project where we write software for local farmers and ranchers and local leaders. And the very first informational interview I did was in Kenya with the leader of the local Lake Naivasha sort of restoration project. Lake Naivasha is like the Lake Tahoe of Kenya. It's a freshwater lake, and it's an amazing place. Best studied ecosystem. And the first question the guy asked me is, so how are you going to avoid data colonialism? And this was 5 years ago, and I went, what? He says, you don't know the term? And you're from Silicon Valley? In a very polite Kenyan way, he kind of did the whack, go do your homework. And it turns out that not only are we being very colonial with our tech industry and extractive when it comes to data around the globe, the developed world nonprofits are also being very colonial in their approach to data and using data to punish local groups, often without understanding the local context. And a classic example is pay for performance, if not done well, can be a very corrosive thing. So I've got lots of examples, but let's settle on 2. One is, we pay for results, and look at this one province in fill-in-the-blank African country. It delivered half as many vaccinations as we expected. We're going to cut their pay because we've done the analysis and they're crap. Oh, well, did you know that was the province that was hit by the typhoon and more than half of their medical facilities were destroyed? So it's like at the very moment they need money, you're going to cut it off because you extracted data, analyzed it without context, and made a pronouncement on how to use it. That's a very colonial attitude so I think that certainly what we do is like, we've never claimed ownership in the data of our partners. And I think that we want to make that the norm, that the data is controlled by the community. Indigenous communities are very concerned about this. And they're used to being exploited in colonial ways. So I think, but decolonizing data is actually not as hard as it sounds. It's just like, most social change happens when people change their behavior. It's less that you show up delivering a miracle and the measure of a tool maker is not that you change the world, it's how the people using your tools change their world using your tool. And so we're the people in the background, we're not in the foreground. It's the communities, the nonprofits that are using our tools, they're the ones that are changing the world, and our job is to make sure their technology doesn't let them down.
Right.
Thank you. Is this on? Oh, there it is. Thank you both very, very much. Jim Fruchterman, Mike Alvarez.
Thank you. Thank you.
I want to thank all of you for coming. I want to remind you the books will be for sale right outside the building, and Jim will be there to sign them. Tomorrow night is a Watson lecture. Next Monday, we have the Movies That Matter, Bright Harvest. Next Thursday, we have Mars Symphony. This program is being video recorded, and in about 10 days, we will be able to post it on our YouTube site. So whatever you missed, you can watch and catch it again, or you can tell your friends as well. I think you've opened up a lot of people's eyes, I know mine, to some things that we're going to have to do a lot of thinking about, and I think it's been a very, very valuable evening for all of us here. So thank you both very, very much.
Thank you. Great
We'll meet you out in
questions.
front.
Great questions. Thank you.
Great. Thanks again.
All right.